Jean and Ken, welcome to the Way Champions podcast and congrats on your new book. What is the goal?
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, well, I'm excited to have this conversation. The book is coming out August of 2024. The subtitle is The Truth About the Youth Sports Industry. And because you live in Oregon like I do, a lot of your firsthand experiences with youth sports in Oregon as well. So I resonated with that. But I believe you're both actually New Yorkers as well, which I am. So
Okay.
I'm a Long Island guy, but we both sort of grew up at a different time in sports. So maybe, Gene, starting with you, just talk about your background in sport and then what you do now, and then Ken will talk to you, and then we'll sort of talk about the genesis of this book.
Sure. Um, so my earliest background in sport was being one of seven kids and playing with and watching my older brothers and sisters who taught me how to play,
Mhm.
Didn't need fancy coaching when you have big brothers and big sisters. But anyway, I spent some time playing softball, and I did many years on a swim team, and my high school sport was swimming.
Mhm.
And I was an avid fan of our local and college sports teams, and of course some of the national teams, including the Yankees, which go
Mhm.
back for generations of Yankee fans in my
Mhm.
family. But anyway, I always enjoyed sports and played for the love of the game. I did not go on to play in college. Many of my family members played at different levels and uh, went on to coach, and some are still master's level athletes. But
Mhm.
um, Ken and I met through sports, on one could say, and have always shared the love of sports, and then wanted to pass it on to our children,
Mhm.
and um, became engaged in coaching them for a little while.
Mhm.
Um, by profession, I'm a clinical psychologist with specialty training with children, adolescents, and families.
Mhm.
And I've done that work since the early 90s. And in part, the intersection of my work with my family and my children involved in these pursuits in this generation is what caught our interest and what we spent a lot of time talking about. Whether it came across my professional plate or my parent plate, we spent a lot of time talking about these things.
Mhm. Awesome. And we'll get into your professional plate and how that how these things cross paths. Ken, what about yourself?
Yeah, I grew up in Ithaca, New York, and I had some older brothers who got into soccer, which of course back then was not anywhere near as popular as it is now. And before long, I desperately wanted to be as good if, you know, as good as my brothers, if not better. So I took soccer more and more seriously. I did play sort of all the other sports at a younger age, little league and all, but played soccer and did things like ODP as a
Mhm.
teenager, which actually meant something back then. I
Mhm.
don't think it means much of anything in Oregon at
Yeah.
this point. And then I did get recruited to the college where I ended up going for soccer, but things were so much different back then about how the recruiting process unfolded. And because I have this background, honestly, John, when my kids entered various stages, for example, the college recruiting stage, things were so different than far from being helpful. I was often kind of a drag because I'd be sitting there going, it can't possibly have changed this much. It can't be
Mhm.
this weird now. And
Mhm.
that all along with the just various things, I'd sort of look at such and such practice and be like, is this really necessary or a good idea? So it did at least produce a nagging doubt along the way about various practices. Mm.
Mhm. Mhm. And so how did these things all come together? You guys obviously raising kids in sports, looking at what was my childhood experience compared to this. Ken, you didn't mention, but you're a history professor at Portland State University. So, y- neither of you certainly didn't need to write this book. What made you say, man, we need to put this pen to paper on this and sort of share our experiences, but then a lot of the sort of the research and stuff as well about what's happening to today's children in sport?
You want to go ahead?
Yeah, I think that after our so many years of shepherding our kids through so many sports, all three of our kids played multiple sports on club teams and their school teams. And we had so many conversations along the way about what's happening and what we learned that was not always easily apparent early on in their younger years of playing in this industry.
Hmm.
And so, honestly, I think we felt like we had a responsibility to other parents coming up into the system to share with them what was not easy to learn and access for us, and that uh, really led to so many stories of unfortunate uh, happenings and endings for some of these kids in sport, whether it be an injury or repeated injuries or just plain burnout, and a lot of time, energy, and money spent that with more information as a consumer, we thought we could be very helpful to the parents coming up, and that we had wished we had known some of this, but a lot of it you can't know until you're in the thick of it. So it was a sort of a therapeutic exercise for us as our
Yeah.
kids work their way out of this
Yeah.
system. We just said, what have we just been through?
Hmm.
And we learned a lot in researching the book along the way about what our hunches had been
Hmm.
were largely confirmed. So
Yeah. And I mean, for you, as a clinical psychologist as well, working with children,
mhm,
I'm sure you saw many things, many issues that were, if not driven by sports, at least sports was symptomatic of a lot of the things they were dealing with, right? So, like, you would see this in your private practice as well, of the detrimental effect. I always love this idea, like, sport is neither good nor bad. Like, it's
right.
neutral. And only when it's wielded by organizations and coaches and parents teaching and doing the right things is sport this positive thing. But we
Mhm.
work under this assumption that sport's amazing for kids. Just sign them up and good things happen. And that's really not always the case. Like, we really need to be, we're way more intentional about finding an electrician than we are about hiring potentially the most influential person in our kid's life.
Very true. Very true. Yeah. Um, the old sort of playing for the love of the sport and child driven model, where it's more of where their passions and willingness to work at it bring them, has largely been replaced by more of the adult driven model, where uh, look, colleges are expensive, and here's a possible ticket to a scholarship. And all of a sudden, what the child wants often really doesn't matter. The way that I most often see it in my practice, I don't specialize in sports psychology,
Hmm.
but the way that I most often see it is um, kids who are ambivalent, reluctant, burnt out, but have no idea if and how they should exit this. And the parents come in and say, we can't get our kid interested in going to practice.
Hmm.
Well, that's very new to my practice. That's
Yeah.
not something that is normal.
Yeah.
Um, and so I began to scratch my head and say, well, yeah, they're probably not having fun, but let's
Yeah.
dig into this a little more.
Yeah, Ken, I wanted to let you touch on that because there's a part in the book where you guys sort of write about, I think, teammates of your own kids who, when they were having bad games, would get these mystery injuries, right? And it was their way of saying, I don't want to do this
Yeah.
anymore. And I think there's that sort of the next phase of it in my experience. Kids sort of, in high school age, they would get these, like you said, these non-diagnosable back pain
Hmm.
or things like that that you couldn't really, and it was their plea, I just don't want to do this anymore. But they were afraid to tell their parents this isn't for me. And so it was easier just to be, quote, injured, right?
Hmm.
Well, and they may have tried to tell their parents, and the parents said, "Oh,
Wouldn't
yeah,
listen.
we
Yeah.
get it, but you need to keep
You
playing.
need to keep
There's a
doing it.
lot invested in this."
I
Yeah.
mean, a lot of this ends up being about the parents.
Yeah.
It ends up being about the parents wanting to tell the neighbors that their child participated in, the surf cup in
Hmm.
San Diego, and the kids have their own way of rebelling because they're sensing how much it means to the parents, and so it's difficult for most kids to confront the parents directly and say that, you all may be enjoying this, but I'm not, so I'll go the injury route. Eventually, John, we switched. When we first got in, we thought we were looking for the best club for our kids. And then before long, we had switched to looking for the least worst club. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So we would dutifully go to the beginning of the year old club meeting, and they would give beautiful speeches about how they were all about development and not about winning. And of course, that would prove to be complete nonsense. But if we looked around carefully, we could try to find a club that was at least trying to develop, the kids and teach certain values, even as they were embedded in a system that if you don't win, if you don't get photos of the kids holding up the trophy at the tournament, then you're not going to attract paying customers.
Or the whole team of parents may move the kids to another club.
Yeah. I mean, this is a really interesting idea that I've spoken about a long time, but you know, so 2012, I put pen to paper on my book, Changing the Game, and I really thought at that point we could make systemic change in sport. And I don't believe that anymore. It's not possible. There's too much money. You call it the youth sports industry, youth sports industrial complex, whatever we want, right? Youth sports is a bigger industry than the NFL, and it's only growing much faster than the NFL, right? So what I think is it's you can find clubs that really believe in this, and I do think there are people out there who are running these organizations who are really trying to do it the right way.
Mhm.
Yes.
And the system doesn't necessarily allow it. But I think one of the most important things parents can do is, when you find a coach who is doing it the right way, who's treating kids the right way, stop looking for the greener grass on the other side. Very few kids outgrow their current team ability wise. But what happens is maybe, player one or two, and you guys write a lot about youth soccer, jumps to the MLS Next program
Mhm.
because they should. But then the problem is three, four, five, and six think they have to leave too. Instead of just saying, let's just chill out here. We got an amazing coach. It's a good club. It's a 5 minute drive, not a 45-minute drive. And so I see a lot of this transactional nature coming, not just coaches or clubs being transactional with parents, but parents being very transactional with clubs that do a good job as well.
Definitely. Hmm.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things we discuss in the book, I mean, this is tricky territory, but it's the parents who need regulation to some extent, because it's often the parents that even when the team is practicing 4 times a week with 2 games on weekends, they're saying that's not enough, okay,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
something along those lines. And so, yeah, it's not, you certainly cannot lay the blame for the system's problems just on the clubs. The parents have their vested interests. They're driving the kids to get perhaps preferential admission, one of the things I really want to stress is it's not just about the scholarships
Yeah, this is
or the,
important. And
yeah,
Brandon, talk about that now. I was going to wait, but go ahead, talk about that because
yeah.
I think it's important.
For the socioeconomic elite, the scholarships actually mean very little. They
Right.
can afford to pay for these colleges. What is really important is preferential admission.
Hmm.
And places like the small elite D3 schools, they don't give scholarships.
Yeah.
Williams and Amherst and
Yeah.
Swarthmore, but they do
Yeah.
give preferential admission.
Yeah.
And that's the same with the Ivy League. And so what's going on here is if you can drop several 100,000 to get the kid to the point that they play tennis well enough to be selected as someone who gets preferential admission for Williams, then
Hmm.
it was probably worth it. And
Yeah.
then there's this flip side of what's going on with the colleges. I'm in higher education. I think that higher education is overall a good, but it has an underbelly. So especially these D3 schools, why has athletics become so important in the last 20 years or so for preferential admission? Well, there are numerous organizations out there that have shown, who are the athletes, especially when you talk about sports like tennis, water polo, and even soccer. Oh,
Squash.
yeah, they come from the socioeconomic elite. So, but we as colleges, we want to put out an image that we're an engine for social mobility. But we just happen to select certain students because they're athletes and we need them for our teams. But we don't really want to talk about the fact that most of them are actually from the socioeconomic elite. They end up paying full tuition and they're exactly the type of families who will donate. And then the kids, in no small part because they're inheriting wealth, will likely be donors down the road. So this is an aspect these colleges don't want to talk about this. They want to talk about the fact that they give, financial aid to maybe 10% of their students, which is wonderful. It's really wonderful that they do that. They don't have to do that. But why are they spending so much time giving preferential admission to athletes? It's because it's part of their business model to go after the elite.
Well, what's really interesting about that is, it was actually the Ivy Leagues that started preferential admission for athletes. They were the
Mhm.
first schools to do that. Like we think about, oh, the big football programs at these, but it was actually the Ivy Leagues because what they realized was, um, you when someone goes to Harvard, they're in the top 1% of all math students in the country, but they're sitting in a math class and they're number 50 out of 50 and they really struggled with that. And so because you look at your, the pool that you're in, you look at your pond and not the big world. And so what the Ivy Leagues figured out was if we bring in athletes and they're not quite as good students, but they're really good at soccer, they're really good at football, they're really good at basketball, whatever it is, they were okay being the worst kid in the math class because they were good at basketball, right? So they actually did that from an academic standpoint as well, that it's okay. They weren't struggling with people being the worst math student anymore, which I always found really, really interesting. You wouldn't think that it was the Ivies, but they did that. But I have, I do a lot of speaking in places like you're talking about. And I mean, I just, a couple months ago was in Greenwich, Connecticut. And that's what the parents said there. They said, we go to this private school where um, every kid is applying to the NESCAC schools and to the Ivy Leagues and whatever, right? So how is my kid getting in and standing out? Because, right, everyone gets all A's these days.
Mhm.
And then, for a while, they got away from standardized testing. So the only way you could differentiate yourself was play lacrosse, crew, fencing, tennis, things like that. So yeah, it's a really big part of it for a lot. And I mean, you talk in your book about just sort of youth sport being something for everybody. No, it's actually trending more and more towards upper middle class and upper class are the ones who can afford to play sports anymore.
I think it's really important that we understand that whatever the elite says, because, the elite is very good at saying the right thing, the system is actually designed for exclusion very purposefully,
Hmm.
not inclusion, because it is a system to try to get preferential admission. So why would you want to devise a system that allows all of kids to take part in it? That just
Hmm.
increases competition for the preferential admission spots. So I don't think it's coincidental that it's exclusive,
Hmm.
because there are actually two ways that we could substantially bring down the costs that would make it affordable to probably, it's maybe affordable to 10 to 15% of families. And there's two ways that we could make it affordable to maybe 80% of families. First of all, the so-called tournications, according to just about every coach we talk to, the travel tournaments, especially at the younger ages,
Hmm.
have no developmental purpose whatsoever.
Correct.
And then,
They probably actually developmentally detrimental.
and
Agreed.
so the
Hmm.
travel's the biggest expense. So we get rid of that. And then there's this whole year-round business.
Hmm.
If it doesn't have to be year-round, then the club fees won't be in the several $1,000 range. So get rid of travel, get rid of year-round, and suddenly it becomes affordable for 80% of families. But I don't think that anybody genuinely wants to do that, no matter how they might talk a good game,
Hmm.
because the money to be made is very much in the travel tournaments
Hmm.
as well as the year-round
Yeah.
club fees, the notion. Yeah.
I was talking, and Gene, I'll throw this idea out to you. I was talking with a friend the other day, and maybe I'll throw this at as a college professor as well, Ken. Like, like we hold our high school teachers' feet to the fire in terms of academic progress for their students. But as a college professor, if a kid doesn't show up to class and bombs out, there's nothing on you, right? It's like, so our colleges don't really, our colleges as well are happy to take your money and make sure and not give your kid a degree. And I remember a couple of years ago when Purdue University, started doing the free tuition, and then, they would take a percentage of your income for 10 years to pay for your college for a while. And it was like, because now they had some skin in the game that, hey, we need you to get a degree
Mhm.
so you can get a better job or whatever. And so I was talking with a friend the other day about, like, imagine, these clubs in across sports that promise all these great things. Well, at the end of 6 years or 8 years, if my kid doesn't go play in college, do we get our money back? Like, how about a money back guarantee, right? From your perspective, if you're so good, then this shouldn't be a problem. But, right, we're happy to take your money and promise you this and not deliver any of it. And then when you bomb out, we go, well, that's the kid's fault. It's not our fault. Gene, go ahead.
Yeah. Um, well, we talk about, wouldn't it be nice if the parent consumer started to demand more information of the clubs?
Hmm.
Um, yeah, how many of your children go on? How many of the athletes go on to play in college?
Hmm.
Um, what are the statistics that are behind these promises? But also to talk about what are the reasons that people leave the clubs? Do you
Hmm.
ever do exit interviews? And what are your injury rates?
Hmm.
What is your dropout rate
Hmm.
of the child who starts at age 7? Do they quit by 13? Do they stay with you through high school? Right? Like that sort of information would be very helpful to the consumer, so that they can do some of their own thinking versus listening to, of course, many of the club directors and coaches. It is in their best interest, of course, to market their club, right?
Hmm.
But part of that is because they're not just producing sneakers, they're working with our children. We
Hmm.
have to have some information about what happens when they participate in this program.
Hmm.
How child and family friendly is it? And do the results really play out the way you hope they will. And when a parent and a kid is young and excited about beginning this, oh, it's travel, we're traveling with our team, so exciting. But by high school, you can go to a game where three three athletes in the same game are taken out by ACL injuries. That did not happen a generation ago.
Yeah, I would just add a few things, one of which I suppose is a little bit of shock value, but we know this in part because one of our daughters coached after graduating from college. I think that a lot of parents would be astonished to hear some of the things that the honest evaluations that the coaches are talking about in reference to certain kids among themselves. Okay. Which is that, does this kid have a chance to play in college? You must be joking. Of course not. That's ridiculous. And yet, is this ever communicated? I mean, end of the year evaluations. We did have a club that did that one year, where they did evaluations. Here's where the kids supposedly were at the beginning of the year. Here's where we thought they were by the end of the year. It was helpful, but most clubs don't want to do that. It's time consuming. And of course, there's a problem with coaches being honest with parents. If they tell them, in our professional opinion, there is just no chance that Johnny is going to play D1 or perhaps college at all. Maybe the parents storm off and put the kid in a different club. Okay.
Or try to get that coach fired, or
right.
Yes.
whatever, right? Or,
Yeah.
your kid's not a starter, and this happens to high school coaches as well, right? Well, let's get rid of the coach because that's the obstacle to our kid being great. And you tell stories about that in your book of people who aren't starting on their high school team and they're convinced they're going to play Division I, especially soccer, which is so hard.
Yeah. I mean, I played in college, and so, I'm not a college coach or anything, but if I go to a game and, say a U16 game or a U18 game, and if a kid hasn't completely stood out within like 20, 30 minutes, unless they're having a rare bad game, then the parent should know better than to think that they're going to play at D1. I mean, it's actually pretty easy for people who know the game. And same with a high school game, although, of course, it depends on what division, but if a kid in a 6A game between two of the better teams in Oregon, if you go and you're like, whoa, who's number 7? I mean, who is that? After like 30 minutes, then maybe there's a chance. But the gap between what the parents presumably are seeing and what people who actually know the game are seeing is significant. And
especially when there's been that enormous investment on the parents' part, and they are thinking, I'm going to get some money and prestige for a college scholarship, or he really is on his way to the pros, right?
Right. And again, especially soccer, right, where Division I men 9.9 scholarships, Division I women 14, right? 25 to 30 people on that roster. So this idea, I used to get that when I was coaching, and like, oh, so and so got a full scholarship. I'm like, no, they didn't. Well, no, yes, they did. I know this. I'm like, no, they didn't, because I was involved in talking to that coach and I know exactly what their offer was. And maybe they got some academic money and, some other aid, but what didn't come from soccer. Only a percentage of it came from soccer or whatever. And so I think, and again, let's use soccer as an example. Your competition is the world. I mean, right now, men's soccer, with between the transfer portal and international students, there's not too many Division I coaches who are throwing big packages at 17-year-olds, because they can go get a 22-year-old off the transfer portal, or a kid who grew up playing in England or Spain who's just better. and so, yeah, sure, you can come here, you can walk on and see how you do and whatever. And again, I think that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's like, it's so hard right now. And men's and women's is only trending that direction as women's soccer gets better around the world as well. And it's a viable path to the pros. So it might be the hardest sport.
Yeah, I don't want to mention the name. People can look it up, but I get the newsletter from my alma mater and about the new recruits for the team. And the women's team will be like so and so junior national team player from Denmark,
Hmm.
so and so junior national team from Japan. And there's usually 6 new recruits, and 4 of them are from outside the US. And well,
Yeah.
okay, fine. International students add something to
Yeah.
campus life and all, but it's not even as though the 6 spots available at the elite school are going to go to Americans.
Right.
Well, I mean, since our competition is the world, as you say,
Yeah.
for these spots, what is the point for what we have done to youth sports? Is it really worth it for our
Hmm.
children to have
Hmm.
turned this system into what we have? I don't think so.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you went to a room of a club, and again, I don't want to just pick on soccer because I love soccer, right? But let's, lacrosse, basketball, whatever, and said, you know, all right, would you keep doing ECNL or the version of the lacrosse version of that, right? Or AAU basketball, if there was zero chance of a scholarship at the end of this, would you keep investing it? Most people would say no, right? So they're chasing after that. Then if you took out preferential admissions for athletes, then people are like, no, we wouldn't do this. There'd be 0 point in doing this, right?
And maybe we'd get more kids having access to sports again.
Yeah. Yeah.
We were pretty surprised. This was the research part of the equation more than the personal experience. When we
Mm.
started poking around, very easy to do because everything's online these days.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anybody who goes and checks out the websites of some of the more famous clubs, the verbiage is astonishing. It's like business school verbiage.
Yeah.
We're a top player in the youth volleyball market.
Hmm.
Parents can expect a return on investment because such and such percentage of our kids go on to play in college. And then, of course, there's
Right.
the page listing. We are, people need to understand the Crossfire brand of soccer. Wow.
Mm.
I didn't realize that club soccer was a brand. I mean, what does that mean exactly? We haven't figured it out yet, but maybe they know how to take quick throw-ins and
Mm.
or in other situations they know to wait. I mean, what exactly do they mean by the Crossfire brand? So yeah, people, take away the so-called return on investment and the system may collapse.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and I think it comes down to, right, if parents are the customers, youth sports is delivering what they're asking for right now. Or or let me just say this, if they're not, if it's not what they want, they're afraid to speak up about what they actually want too. So it's this combination of things, right? This one driven of like, we want more, 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 younger, 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 chase this thing. Or on the other hand, I hate that. And I find this more common. I hate this. This isn't good for my family, for our finances, for my other kids, but I'm afraid to speak up because my kid might lose their spot. Or what else are we going to do? My kid can't go play in the rec league. They're too good, which I agree with. And so go ahead. And then I want to read a quote just about over involved parents that I thought was really good. But Jean, you wanted to say something there.
Well, the parents are the customers. The parents are paying the bills,
Yeah.
but their children are the consumers that need protection. And
Yeah.
when the
Amen.
parents are confused and or unwilling to do that protecting, or allow them to have that green light to exit, because there's always competing parenting truths here, right? You have them see it to the end, or you have them do what they love. But the child consumer is who needs protecting. So if this is the industry is giving the parents what they want, there's still big problems because the children are the ones who face the impact of this.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And I always liken it to, because people will say to me, well, the parents are our customers. We're just giving them what they want. I'm like,
Mhm.
yeah, but imagine your doctor did that to kids, right? That the,
That's right.
the parent came in and said, I demand this, this, and the doctor said, well, that's not really good for your kid, but because you are paying the bill, we're going to do that. Like that's called malpractice.
Right. Everyone bears some responsibility to paying attention to the impact of this system on our youth, who, when they start at 7 and even when they're 17, 18,
Mhm.
they have really the least say of all of what can be done about this, and how to protect themselves.
So I want to read this quote that you wrote, and I don't know who wrote this chapter or whatever. When Jerry and I write books together, people ask me, I'm like, I didn't write that, so I'll let him answer it. So, I don't know who this goes to, but you write, and this might be Eugene, given your background. One of the simplest ways to define an over-involved parent is one who insists on controlling the uncontrollable for their child while blindly or ambivalently denying and ignoring the emotional and physical costs to the child, the family, and the parent-child relationship. So I thought that was just such a great quote of trying to control the uncontrollable. And this is what we see, right? And then a tough coach comes in. That's an uncontrollable. Let's switch clubs. Kid loses their starting spot, or a better player joins the team. Uncontrollable, whatever. We lost because the opponent was good. Uncontrollable. And we try to micromanage that. So just expand upon that, because I thought it was just really well written.
Ooh, well, I think that many parents view this as their responsibility
Hmm.
to make sure that any possible opportunity for their child to advance, get ahead, succeed, or reach a prestigious place, it's their responsibility to control that their kid reach this. And
Hmm.
so they'll check off any box that they can, that they've heard about other parents trying to do to make this happen. And they really honestly believe that they are doing what is best to secure
Hmm.
the good future for the child. And it's really hard for them to entertain at the same time the other competing truths, which is the impact on your child when you are taking over what is theirs to learn how to choose, control, access. You're taking over your child's developing autonomy,
Yeah.
and the price can be huge. Sometimes, with some children, with some temperaments, with some parents, in some good coaching and club situations, it can work okay.
Hmm.
But that's pretty rare. And more often, in the relationship between the parent and child pays a heavy price,
Mm.
and the child's ability to understand themselves, their identity, what they want, their ability to make their own decisions, um, that autonomy is severely compromised. And we see the impact pretty far along into their adult lives.
And what's the definition of success, right? Is you know Andre Agassi's dad raising the number one tennis player in the world who then becomes a crack addict? Is that success or failure, right?
Exactly.
You know,
Exactly. Are they more than just the role that they've been given a red carpet or set a silver table for them to succeed? They've been, their success has been paid for and paved instead of earned.
and for every Andre Agassi who makes it, where's the one who did his ACL twice and you never heard of, who also becomes a crack addict,
That's
right?
right.
So like that's like we we put a lot of focus on the unicorns that make it and say, I want to be the next Richard Williams or Earl Woods or whatever. But your kid's not Serena and Venus. Your kid's not Tiger. And there's trade-offs for that as well. You know, most elite athletes, there's an unhealthy selfishness and self-centeredness and ruthlessness to get to that level that doesn't necessarily play well after their athletic career. And that's why a lot of them go through these really hard transition periods. So then if we pour everything into that basket and your kid gets their third concussion or third ACL and has to stop playing at 16, they are not equipped with skills to function well in society.
Mm-hmm. They're paying a big price.
Paying a huge price for athletic pursuit.
And for so few of them to access even a college spot, let alone an Olympic or pro spot, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So why are so many of us willing to have our children pay this price?
Yeah.
I think that one of the things that they're really after, when we started really poking around about the verbiage that's involved in this industry, it is amazing how often the term elite comes up.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because it's one of my least favorite words.
Right. So the goal is to be part of the elite. Well, okay, I guess that ties in with the preferential admission. You need to get into the right school. I mean, money can, perhaps buy this, but I mean, there's a very significant class uneasiness at play here, and the clubs know how to exploit that. And I hate to throw like cold water in the face of like tens of thousands of American families. And I played college soccer and was, very proud of it for long afterwards. But what does it mean compared to the rest of the world to play college sports in the US? Because nobody else really does it our way. And so if you try to explain to a family in France that's not really aware of the American system that our kid is on a college volleyball team, they'll be like, oh, I guess that's sort of like the hiking club, right?
Yeah,
Because
yeah. Certainly the American college sports system is different.
yeah. So it's like, well, so they play college. And for some of them, it's like, why are our nice friends from the United States trying to make such a big deal of the fact that their daughter plays college sports? I mean, in our country, you either play professionally or you play rec, and
Yeah,
99% of people are rec. And it's like, they're really excited that she plays, volleyball at such and such college, and nobody else in the entire world does this.
And for all that cost, stress, turmoil, strife, potential consequences to the youth athlete, even if they do make it to college, even if they have a little scholarship, for the vast majority of them, it's just 4 more years of playing the game.
yeah,
That's it. That's
yeah.
all it is.
Yeah. And again, there's great things. I mean, again, we're not here to bash this, right? And I do think, for a friend in Germany or whatever who says, well, what's the big deal? Like it does take a lot to play a college sport, a Division I athlete, it's probably 30 to 40 hours a week. So it is a huge commitment, much more so than maybe in a university overseas or something like that. So it deserves more recognition, I think, than maybe they get it because they just don't understand. But I do think, the whole point is like, what's the end game? What's our definition of success? Why are our kids in sports? Like that's what we really have to think about. And this word elite that you bring up, Ken, is so again, it's like the worst word in youth sports because everyone thinks, well, we need to be elite as well, but there is no elite 12-year-old. There might be an elite 12-year-old gymnast, there might be an elite 12-year-old figure skater, but I don't know of any other sport where there's truly an elite 12-year-old. Maybe they're pretty good for 12, but they're not going to the major leagues at 13, right? I mean, maybe we use this word for Kevin Sullivan in soccer, who as 14 and just moved up to the first team for Philly Union, right? But that's one person, right? That's not that, he's just, all these people are like, well, how do we make the elite team? I'm like, just change the name of your team. That's what everyone else does, like that seems to, that's the path. Or, well, if Ken and Jean's kids are elite, then my kids need to be elite too. And it becomes again a parental ego thing.
Right.
Yeah.
And also for the different idea of elite, if we're really wanting to have a national system that trains elite national level athletes, then why don't we give access to all of our children instead of the ones who can afford it?
Yeah. I mean, the
Leaving so
meritocracy
many
is,
out. Yeah.
yeah, it's gone and only trending worse. And what's sad to me in some sports, and soccer would probably be the worst about this, is the sort of poo-pooing of high school soccer, which is the one avenue for people without money to go play.
Yeah.
Right? Like maybe you pay a $50 activity fee or something, but your travel is taken care of and your coaching and everything's paid for. And then we're saying that has no value. Yet for some kids, it's the only way in the door.
Oh, it has incredible value for keeping kids on track scholastically. I mean, part of a school community, but I don't know if it's reached this extent in Bend, but here in the Portland metropolitan area, for the so-called 6A schools, the bigger schools, in other words, it's unlikely you'll ever make the high school team if you haven't been involved with pay to play most of your childhood. So part of being a parent these days is if you want to keep the kid, busy, an age-old strategy for keeping them out of trouble and keeping them involved in high school sports, you may have to shell out several tens of thousands of dollars along the way for the apprenticeship so they are good enough to make the 6A team. Because almost every kid on a 6A team, at least the better ones in the Portland area, is a pay-to-play kid.
Yeah. No, it's true. And so this is the problem is the trickle down effect in sports, right? If you want this at 18, you have to do this at 16. If you want this at 16, it's 14. But then when we start getting into, if you want this at 12, you have to do this at 10 or 8 or 6. That's where it starts to go. Like, because I don't think there's anything wrong with a 14-year-old saying soccer is my thing, all in, right? Like, amen to that. And even a little bit younger for the right kid, right? Now they still need multi-movement. They still need strength. They need to be an athlete as well. And the professional clubs around the world develop athletes and not just soccer players. Whereas in America, we just develop soccer players and then wonder why they all get hurt. But this trickle down effect of, well, if I want to do this at 14, then I need to do this at 12, 10, 8, and 6. And that's where the problem lies, is that 6-year-old who should be sampling sports has to only play lacrosse or soccer or volleyball because they're out of the pipeline. It becomes this self-fulfilling prophecy that if you're not there at 8, you can't get back in. And that's a huge problem.
Yeah. Or what if the 14-year-old who feels like it's their thing, soccer is their thing at 14? Great. What about if at 16, they really want to try another sport now and some fabulous friends are playing on a school team? And sorry, you can't do that. I mean,
I mean, there's all sorts of questions that we wish we had asked along the way, although you can only imagine the sort of problems they would have caused. There was a coach who at the time was quite prominent who told the kids in our club that they should absolutely only be playing one sport. One sport. And of course, in retrospect, we wish that we'd gone and asked him, who, by the way, his background included multiple sports. We were able to figure that out, that he played multiple sports. So are you going to pay the health costs for the injuries? Are you going to pay for those?
For the year-round single sport specialization.
And do you have an economic interest in giving this advice that they should only play one sport, because then they have to pay the fees. And so, yeah, there are these questions that, I'm sure are on the minds of a lot of parents, but it becomes difficult when your kid is part of a team and you know that the coaches have a lot of power and they say these outrageous things, and you're kind of like, well, the kids know that's nonsense and all, and we know it's nonsense, and somebody really should confront the coach, but it's tricky though.
It's not going to be me, because then they'll just cut my kid and replace
Yeah.
him and whatever. And yeah, I mean this goes back to the point of like, when you find a good coach who's willing to work with a kid to let them play another sport, just be grateful and stick it out, like
Yeah.
don't go looking for the next best thing, because you're probably not going to get lucky twice in a row.
Well, stick it out, but often you only get 1 year. And then there's
Yeah.
all those other years ahead with who's next, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's a hard thing, and I mean, like you guys talked about, you had multiple kids, right? And so it's not just the commitments for one kid, it's the commitments for multiple kids, and you're stuck in traffic and your kids are going to 3 different places and whatever. And it's funny, a lot of the speaking I do now, when I'm going to schools and they're like, we're going to put on this event in the evening, and I'm like, we should do one in the morning too, because oftentimes it's much easier for a parent to go to work 2 hours late
Ah,
than it is to clear their afternoon to come to a speaker.
yeah.
yeah.
you know so yeah, it's interesting. Well, as we're getting near the end here, is there any other things that you think you really want to highlight from the book, and then we'll tell people how to find it and stuff?
If there is hope of reform, we suspect that, first of all, we do think that if colleges and universities were embarrassed enough to have to give up preferential admission for athletes,
Hmm.
which is not out of the question. They're under the microscope right now for a lot of their practices,
For
including
legacy
yeah,
admissions and things like that. Yeah.
the legacies often overlap with the athletics as well.
Yeah.
Then we think that would fundamentally change the system, or we think the youth sports industry would collapse. But there could be a role for legislatures. I mean, they've stepped in other cases. They stepped in with the concussion issue. Could they step in and regulate this? A few good lawsuits by health insurance companies or by parents
Hmm.
might do wonders, where uh, they try to require that the club pay the costs of overuse injuries. That could be very interesting. Even one successful lawsuit where they showed that it was the club's overuse, practice and game schedule that caused the injury, and the club's on the hook for several $100,000. That might require a change in practices. But I have to admit, I share your general skepticism about whether change is likely. We've talked about this at length, and sometimes I wonder if it's going to take some bizarre, kind of hard to anticipate, earthquake type event where suddenly it just, something happens that makes various responsible parties realize they have to do something, and that's very hard to predict what that might be.
Yeah, I mean, I thought, there was this little hope for me that COVID might have been, we hit the stop button, and
Yeah.
lots of people had family dinners for the first time in years and all this. And I thought, wow, maybe this is it, when people like take a step back. But as we know, sport was the first thing that came back. Couldn't go to school, but you went to sports and you went to tournaments and in states that had less restrictions and whatever. And it was like, man, like it came roaring back, and everyone was trying to make up for lost time. So not that it not only not make it better, I think it made it worse.
Oh boy, we were so lucky in terms of understanding the system. We happened to be on the mailing list for one of those, what are they described as? Recruitment assistance companies, the companies that, you pay to help your
Hmm.
kid, find
Yeah,
a spot. We'd never paid, by the way, we never did
yeah,
this, but we were on a list. They were just apoplectic during the pandemic, about, offering all sorts of special workshops about how to reach out to college coaches even in the pandemic or something. And it was amazing how freaked they were about their income stream, but one way or another they were going to make sure that the industry marched on, and they made their money and advising, how to produce the perfect video so that the,
hmm,
the coach would still recruit your child or something.
hmm,
But
yeah.
we have talked about also it would probably take some national governing bodies, because there's so many different sports with their own governing bodies and very different policies depending on which sport you're talking about. Some governing body that is in charge of holding the club's
Heat the fire. Yeah, for
body
sure. Yeah.
for holding themselves accountable to what we are. The science is already there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's holding themselves accountable to enforcing best safe practices for their athletes.
Yeah.
Including the United States Soccer Federation. Now,
Yeah.
I cannot believe that these people do not understand that holding national championships for 13-year-olds, for the U13 age, has any meaning whatsoever in terms of development or where the kids are going to be. But it's the United States Soccer Federation that sponsors, the national championship. First, you go off to regionals, and then you go to the national championship, and it starts as early
Well,
as
it's the US youth soccer, right? It's ECNL, it's AYSO, it's
uh-huh,
all these different umbrellas
yeah,
under the US Soccer
yeah,
Federation
Right.
that do it. And again, I mean, they did show, when they mandated small-sided games, which was a good thing,
Mhm.
right? That they can mandate certain things and people have
hmm
to get on board, or
yeah,
hey, you're out. You can't be an affiliate anymore.
hmm
That was a good thing. At the same time, they changed the thing to birth years and destroyed teams all over and
hmm
drove participation down, especially in small places like Bend where
hmm
you know where the kids are, the teams are now 50-50 in two different grades. Well, kids
Yeah.
go off
yeah,
to high
yeah,
school and teams fall apart, and that's why most kids quit at that age, right? And so they did one good thing and one bad thing. But
yeah.
I watch, in soccer, like people talk about, well, winning shouldn't matter or whatever. Well, I've been to Spain, and I can tell you those 9-year-olds and 10-year-olds coaches and like they want to win. It's super competitive. They pay
Mhm,
attention. They keep standings, right? But you know what? They also have a mandate that every kid plays 50% of every game,
mhm,
right? So they play quarters and not halves. If you don't play the first quarter, you start and play the whole second quarter. If you don't play the second, you start and play the whole third. And as a coach, you'll get suspended if your kids don't. So we want to win, but all 14 of my kids or 16 of my kids have to play half a game. So I
mhm.
can't just say I want to win and you three aren't going to play today. Right. And so, and here they go, arguably the best men's and women's team in the entire world.
It's I mean, I can even begin to describe how many stories we heard from disgruntled parents who dropped several $1,000s to have their kid go off to a tournament, and then the kid came home having played 5 to 10 minutes the whole weekend. I mean,
Yeah,
so
ridiculous.
why are they doing that, and why is it permitted?
Yeah, that's the kind of stuff that drives me crazy. That shouldn't be
Yeah.
permitted and whatever. So
Mhm.
And no one doubts that, even if we shifted to a thing of not keeping score here at younger ages, of course, the competitive ones keep score in their own heads, and so do
right.
the parents. But the consequences of not winning in our system are
Mhm.
very different in this system for the economic impact of this industry than
Right.
it is in other countries.
Right.
When big money is involved, winning matters. I mean,
Yeah.
Mm,
But
It,
because it's a way we can measure our quote investment
yeah.
again, right? Well, did you win, right? Versus like joy and character development and things like this. Well,
Mhm.
guys, thank you for this book. Tell people about the book, where they can get it, and then also how they can connect with you both.
Go ahead.
The book is coming out August 6th. You can find it most easily on Amazon. I know there are other links out there, other booksellers that are
Mhm.
uh, putting it out there too. You can also buy it on Kindle.
Mhm.
And what else?
In terms of contacting us, my email is publicly available. If you just look me up as a professor at Portland State University, if people want to check in with stories or questions, it's always exciting to hear from readers. And
And then for me, it would be my personal email. It's JeanLLinscott@gmail.com.
Okay.
Happy to answer questions or just listen to stories. Yeah.
Okay. Perfect. Awesome. Well, thank you both for being on the Way of Champions. Thanks for the book. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed, I read a couple of quotes, but I had a lot of things highlighted in there because I think you stated some serious issues very succinctly and well. So thank you for your work and for being advocates for the children and for being on the podcast.
Thank you for your interest and your time.
yeah, appreciate it, John. Look forward to the final version.
Thanks everyone for listening. Thank you again to Ken Ruoff. Thanks everyone for listening. Thanks again to Jean Linscott and Ken Ruoff. The book is What is the Goal? The Truth About the Youth Sports Industry. And yeah, it's a good read with some good ideas and people who have sort of been in that space professionally and then also parentally, if that's a word. But yeah, thanks so much. You can find the book on Amazon and all that sort of stuff. Comes out in early August 2024. All right. Thank you to our friends at Sprocket Sports. Thank you to all of our Patreon podcast champions. As we're wrapping up summer here again, if you want to do a book read with your team, the champion teammate is available. We do it bulk sales. Just email me, John at changethegameproject.com, or grab it on Amazon. That's up to you, but I'll save you a few bucks if you go straight through me. And it's a great way to sort of set the tone for your season coming up and everything as well. Also, sign up there in the show notes there for our certification and mastermind program, which will be kicking off in 2025. It's going to be a super, super cool deep dive and program. All right. But in the meantime, remember that your influence is never neutral. So go out there, change the world, make a difference. See you again next week.